Okay, today I want to go in depth on the dark side of Activision Blizzard. A lot of viewers may be assuming I will now discuss microtransactions, loot boxes, or predatory monetization. It's common knowledge that Activision Blizzard has some of the most invasive monetary practices in the entire industry, but for today I would like to pivot and focus on a few lesser known aspects of the company. Activision Blizzard is a highly profitable company, mostly based on unregulated and possibly unethical mechanisms, but regardless, highly profitable still. In 2018, they posted record revenue to the tune of over $7.5 billion. But once we recognize how lucrative their business model currently is, we need to examine their salary structure and employee compensation. Here's where it gets a little bit complicated, and there is certainly a degree of reasonable flexibility or deviation in the figures I'm about to compare, but even accounting for such deviation, it becomes clear that on a fundamental level, something is deeply wrong with the company and its wage or salary structure. CEO of Activision Blizzard, Robert A. Kotick, is among the most overpaid men in America. This angle has been covered by various different outlets and financial publications, but instead of merely citing the accusation from others, which lacks a certain degree of impact, I believe, I would like to outline a few examples of how monumental this overpayment is. According to the New York Times and its analysis of the highest paid CEOs in America, Robert A. Kotick comes in at number 21. Now, a large section of Mr. Kotick's compensation is derived from stock options. These bonuses are paid out in a very meticulous way, often tied to company performance or various other benchmarks, and are calculated into annual salary estimates during the year they are introduced. So if a large amount of equity or stock option compensation is introduced on a specific year, but that is the only occurrence where it happens, the salary for a recipient during that fiscal period would be very high, but surrounding data points would be far lower and more accurate. This is not the case for Mr. Kotick. In 2018, he was awarded a large enrichment package at an estimated value of $31 million. And 1 year prior, in 2017, he was awarded a similar enrichment package of $28 million. And the previous year before that, $33 million combined bonuses that included all miscellaneous compensation methods. This is an ongoing, consistent pattern, not an outlier. Now, one might look at this figure and assume that there is nothing out of the ordinary. $7.5 billion in annual revenue is no small thing. And while Mr. Kotick is among the most overpaid executives in America, as per the analysis which factors in average employee salary versus CEO compensation, he's not in fact the most overpaid, so perhaps this is not an issue. Well, to put things in perspective, I would like to compare a couple of other video game publishers and their own CEO compensation packages to underline the point that Mr. Kotick is raking in a disproportionate amount of money, and that is truly only just the beginning. If we turn to Ubisoft, we can see a smaller yet still widely successful publisher. Their financial statements are certainly weaker than Activision Blizzard, but comparing market capitalization, we can see roughly $7 billion for Ubisoft versus well over $36 billion for Activision Blizzard. If we examine revenue and sales charts, we can see 1.7 billion euros for Ubisoft, closer to 1.9 billion US, and for Activision Blizzard, 7.5 billion in revenue. This is a large difference, approaching a 4 times multiple for Activision over Ubisoft, but now we have to examine CEO compensation. CEO of Ubisoft, Yves Guillemot, received a compensation package, including stock options, valued at roughly 2 million euros as of fiscal year 2019. This package is also accurate from a historical perspective with a relatively low amount of deviation. It's no small sum, but compare that with the 31 million that Robert A. Kotick raked in during 2018, and the previous years of 27 million, 33 million, and so on. Ubisoft is a smaller company. Its market capitalization is about 1/5 that of Activision Blizzard. Its revenue is a little more than a quarter when directly compared, but the CEO compensation package for Activision Blizzard is almost 15 times higher than that of Ubisoft. However, this is merely one example. Now let's examine Sony. Sony, unlike Ubisoft, is far larger than Activision Blizzard. Sony's revenue for the past 10 plus years has been topping over $70 billion, and its market capitalization is almost double that of Activision Blizzard. However, when you examine CEO compensation, there is a discrepancy between expectation and reality. Newly appointed Sony CEO Kenichiro Yoshida is logged as receiving annual compensation at the sum of $3.6 million. Now, a definite weakness in this comparison is the fact that Mr. Yoshida was only just appointed, and thus lacks any sort of long-term or built-upon consecutive compensation increases over the years. But when we compare his predecessor, Kaz Hirai, we can see that Mr. Hirai was compensated in his retirement year, including his retirement bonus, which is a one-off, at about $19 million. If you subtract the one-time bonus for retirement, which was in excess of $10 million, it becomes clear his typical salary amount, including performance bonuses, was about $8 million. Now, compare these two executives to Mr. Kotick. Sony is a company with over 10 times the annual revenue of Activision Blizzard, a market capitalization twice the size, and yet the CEO of Activision Blizzard has a compensation package inversely almost 10 times the size of this larger company with its newest appointed executive. Even considering the previous CEO, Robert A. Kotick is compensated at 4 to 5 times the rate of Kaz Hirai. These numbers simply don't make any sense. In a vacuum, this is less of an important factor. It's an overpaid CEO in America. In other news, water is wet. But Activision Blizzard has a broader history with this subject than just its CEO. In early 2019, despite record 2018 revenue, Activision Blizzard commenced with a plan to lay off around 8% of its employees overall. Around 700 to 800 workers were cut loose in the face of the strongest fiscal year Activision Blizzard has ever had. Now, the reasons behind this are numerous. A large chunk of that staff may have been directly affiliated with the Destiny IP, which had split away and was now controlled by Bungie, and not Activision Blizzard. But recently, we also learned, and shout out to Jim Sterling here, I was not aware of this, that Activision Blizzard was also hiring community managers very recently, despite having just fired community managers in the wave of mass layoffs. There can be many different reasons for this. Perhaps the employees were coincidentally fired for unrelated job performance reasons. It happens, I'm not sure. But the seeds of doubt exist that the layoffs were a shareholder appeasement stunt due to a weak 2019 forecast for the company. And regardless of the details and the exact specifics, it shows that the entirety of these employees were not necessarily exclusively focused on the Destiny games. Here's where it ties back into executive compensation, though. Right as all of this transpired, Activision Blizzard awarded a $15 million enrichment package to Dennis Durkin, as he assumed the position of Chief Financial Officer, or CFO. This is a hefty signing bonus, and right during the period where employees were having their careers severed and their lives uprooted. It's a very tone-deaf move, but there is even more to this angle. A lesser-known fact is that Dennis Durkin had held this exact position before. This was his second stint as Activision Blizzard's CFO. Previously, he had held the position from 2012 to 2017, then assuming the title of Chief Corporate Officer, or COO. But most recently, he reassumed his prior position as CFO with a $15 million enrichment package in the midst of record layoffs. And, yet again, we can see that Dennis Durkin's salary far exceeds competing company standards, even when compared to organizations far larger and more profitable. Activision Blizzard displays a pattern of completely disproportionate executive compensation, and again, by itself this might be an issue that could be forgotten or brushed aside, but they do not exist in an isolated environment. They are prominently displayed right next to worker mistreatment. An expose by Jason Schreier recently surfaced regarding contractor expectations, working conditions, and developer crunch time. Now, I believe there to be a fair amount of nuance when it comes to crunch time development. Overtime is not inherently a bad thing, and this aggressive mentality that all developer crunch time is so horrifically wrong, woe is me, in my opinion, is ignorant and really, really annoying. But the working conditions, according to inside sources at Activision Blizzard, were not at an acceptable level, which absolutely is cause for concern. Among many other grievances, things like lack of air conditioning in high heat rooms due to the electronics and the numerous amounts of computers that were in there were mentioned, but when confronted about it, management staff would claim that the air conditioner was broken, despite it being active on a timer throughout the day. This is where, at least to me, things become completely unjustifiable. While the executives, such as CEO and CFO, are compensated to the tune of tens of millions of dollars, far higher than they deserve and disproportionate when compared to other successful companies, their contractors are kept in harsh working conditions without even fundamental comforts because of how unbelievably greedy this company is. Now, I said I would try to stay away from the hashed and rehashed argument of loot boxes or predatory monetization, but to round out my stance in the analysis of Activision Blizzard's dark side, it has to at least be loosely outlined. Activision Blizzard earns a large chunk of its revenue from Candy Crush, Overwatch, and Call of Duty. Candy Crush is so predatory that a bipartisan anti-monetization initiative is making its way through the United States government as of the creation of this video, specifically aimed at Candy Crush and other games utilizing a similar method. And by the way, getting bipartisan support on anything nowadays in the current climate with left versus right is extremely impressive, so that means it's really, really bad, and people are taking notice. Overwatch makes almost all of its revenue from randomized loot box rewards, a concept that is meticulously designed to extract the highest sum of money possible from an individual who wishes to unlock rare cosmetics through randomization. And Call of Duty, which has now famously gone down the road of adding an alternative monetization method post-release after the review cycle has passed. Call of Duty Black Ops 4 launched without the extremely predatory methods and the money gouging cosmetics, but weeks after release, when the news cycle had died down, they added all of it in without a second thought. This is a deliberate tactic meant to sneak in unpopular monetization mechanics while minimizing backlash, and isolated one by one, Candy Crush or Call of Duty or Overwatch might be ignored. The greedy monetization by itself, or the disproportionate compensation of executives, even the working condition concerns alone could be forgiven. Even a company as beloved as CD Projekt Red has had its fair share of struggles, with working conditions being a notable focal point. One issue alone does not constitute an evil company, but Activision Blizzard has stacked the issues so high and doubled down on them so hard for such an extended period of time that its dark side is now its most prominent face, and they must be held accountable. That's it for today, though. Everyone knows that a lot of these massive publishers are increasingly predatory, but I thought it would be worthwhile to touch on some of the topics that are less discussed, yet just as valuable. If you want to support the channel, check out the links down below. We have memberships, a Patreon, merch, etc., but I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching, and have a nice night.